The top business stories live from the Sky News City studio. The Dow Jones Industrial Average has gone above 40,000 for the first time. We'll have reaction. Global mergers and acquisitions activity bounced back during the first 3 months of the year, but not in European private equity. Plus, the chief executive of newly promoted Ipswich Town on how to plan financially for life in the Premier League. Good afternoon, this is Business Live with me, Ian King. Global mergers and acquisitions activity bounced back during the first 3 months of the year, with volumes globally climbing by 30% to $755 billion. But activity is not thriving everywhere. Research published today by DC Advisory Europe suggests M&A in the European private equity sector was down 23% year-on-year, with the number of new buyouts completed in the quarter the lowest since the July to September quarter of 2020. With me now is Richard Madden. He's European Executive Chairman of DC Advisory Europe. Richard, great to see you again this afternoon. Why this slowdown in activity, do you think?
It's because M&A is a very long lead time business, so you're always looking to predict the future, and people 6 to 9 months ago were not feeling confident, and so deals haven't been happening.
And, of course, worth pointing out, this is despite the fact that there is an awful lot of dry powder in the jargon waiting to be used.
There is very, very significant dry powder, so private equity have been raising more money than ever before, but they haven't got the appetite yet to deploy it.
What's going to bring about a change in the weather?
So I think actually your top story about the Dow Jones will begin to change things, because if I own a business today, I'm worried about what it's worth in the future. If markets are high, then I will have a belief that the value of my business will also have gone up, so I'll be encouraged to put it up for sale. And once that flow of businesses for sale comes into the market, so there'll be increased activity.
Are there any sectors or geographies right now which are bucking the trend?
Very few. The interesting one is probably tech, which was a significant part of the bubble in 2021, but has gone very quiet since, because people are nervous, because when things are very fully valued, as they were, you could get it terribly wrong. So that's been slow, but I'm confident that that will come back and aggressively.
OK, and worth pointing out that Europe, the UK remains Europe's leading private equity hub.
Yes, about 30% of all of the European activity in private equity is in the UK, and a lot of UK funds are now looking to invest into continental Europe.
Obviously, there's been a good deal of soul-searching about valuations here in the UK stock market remaining at a discount to peers. I mean, one would have thought that would be a real spur to activity.
I think it is. The issue, though, is that the public-to-private stories that make so much of the news represent a tiny part of the market. So if you go to last year, there were, give or take, 4,000 M&A transactions, of which 30 were public-to-private. So there's a lot of noise about it, but not a lot of activity.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, because we have seen sort of examples of window shopping. I mean, I think, for example, of Currys earlier this year knocking back what was quite an opportunistic approach.
Yes, I mean, I think it does look tempting, but boards don't need to sell, and if they believe the whole market is undervalued, they think they'll recover when the market swings back, and therefore why would they sell now? So I think the undervaluation is something that stifles board activity as well.
Yeah, but nonetheless, I mean, it's worth pointing out, I mean, a lot of conversations I have with CEOs, they grumble an awful lot behind the scenes about their own valuations. I mean, CEOs always grumble about their stocks' valuations, but they do seem to have a point.
They do have a point. I do think there is an unloved element about the UK, and that unloved element about the UK comes into the markets as well.
Yeah. Now, what about the general election? What sort of impact is that going to have on activity?
I've thought a lot about this, and the answer is probably not very much.
OK.
I think a lot of the sentiment is baked in. I think the Labour Party, who may or may not be the next government, have done a good job of persuading people that they are supportive of business. And so I think people broadly think there won't be a significant change in sentiment.
Yeah, that's interesting. What about continental Europe? What is going to trigger activity there? Is it the same sort of factors?
It's a very similar story. I mean, I think as a continent, the Western European continent is struggling for growth. And so we're all looking for ways to grow businesses and increase levels of activity, increase productivity, but it's a challenge.
Now, obviously, here in the UK, a lot of the public-to-private buyouts that have taken place have been done by American private equity firms. What about the local players?
I think the local players are a little more timid than the Americans. So there is a sense in the US that when you're down and you fail, you pick yourself up and you run harder, whereas we sort of get disappointed and wallow in our disappointment for a period of time, and then we do it. So I think we're just a little slower to come back and feel those animal juices flowing.
OK, well, fingers crossed they're back soon. Richard, great to see you this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Some other business news stories for you now. And shares of BT Group have risen this afternoon by more than 16% as its new chief executive unexpectedly raised the dividend and set a target to double the company's free cash flow over the next 5 years. Alison Kirkby also held out the prospect of disposing of BT's global business, as she said BT had reached peak investment on the rollout of full fibre broadband. She said BT was on target to have full fibre available for 25 million premises by the end of 2026. Well, BT's pre-tax profits for the year to the end of March came in at £1.2 billion. That was down 31% on the previous 12 months, reflecting higher investment costs and a write-down in the value of its BT business unit. EasyJet said today it's expecting a record summer as it continues to add capacity to meet demand. The airline, which has launched 158 new routes for the current financial year, has opened bases at Birmingham and Alicante during the last 6 months and said today it would reopen its base at Southend Airport, which was closed during the pandemic, with the creation of 130 jobs. Well, EasyJet was reporting a pre-tax loss of £350 million for the 6 months to the end of March. That's down from £411 million in the same period last year. It also announced that its chief executive, Johan Lundgren, will step down next year after 7 years in the role. I spoke to him a little earlier today and asked about EasyJet's expectation of growing to capacity of 100 million seats this year.
That is a reflection really of a positive demand that we're seeing really across the whole of the network. But you pointed out our opening of the base in Southend as well, and that is just demonstrates our, the demand we see here in the UK, and also that we believe we have more to do to invest in there as well. So we're going to grow around 8%. That gives us that 100 million passenger numbers that you're talking about approximately, and that is more than the market overall, we should say. So we do see a positive demand, and this is very much supported also by EasyJet Holidays that is now contributing also to the group, including the airline.
And you can read more about Johan Lundgren and my thoughts on his record as EasyJet's chief executive on the Sky News website and digital platforms. Just click on the QR code on your screen right now. Doesn't appear to be there, does it? Anyway, it's on our digital platforms. Oh, it is there, apparently. OK. Well, it's beneath me. There it is. Look at that. Teach me to not have my wits around me. Right, on to other news stories now. And the main supplier of water and sewerage services to the northwest of England said today it had brought forward £400 million worth of investment to reduce bills from more than 150 storm overflows. United Utilities said it had done so after seeing increased instances of flooding and spills from storm overflows due to the region suffering its heaviest rainfall last year since 1954. Well, it was reporting an operating profit of £480.2 million for the year. That was up 8.9% on 2022. The shares are down 1.75%. Now, this time last year, I spoke to the chief executive of Ipswich Town Football Club, Mark Ashton, following promotion from League One to the Championship. Well, 12 months on and led by manager Kieran McKenna, the club has done it again, winning promotion to the Premier League. But that means next season they'll be competing both on the pitch and financially with some of the richest clubs in the world. So presumably the next few weeks look like being a busy time for Mark and his team.
It certainly does. Yeah, the players are away now. But the work has started in earnest for us, both on and off the pitch. And it's going to be a very, very busy period for us.
What are your priorities?
I think we've got two, really. Under Section K rules from the Premier League, they audit us as one of the clubs that could be promoted in January. And from that came 15 key infrastructure projects that will cost several £1 million. And they have already started. Everything from broadcast facilities to cabling to seat moves to VAR, etc., all underway. And then on the pitch, manager has been in and around the office. He hasn't had any days off. And we're working on planning the squad for the Premier League, which still sounds unbelievable.
Are you anticipating spending heavily on the squad?
Yeah, look, I think we will need to spend for sure. I was in the Premier League's offices yesterday, running through again their financial fair play rules, so we know exactly what we can do, because we don't want to get caught on that. But we have really good investors who sit behind the football club, and they'll want to support Kieran. So, yeah, we'll certainly be active in the transfer market.
Yeah, you mentioned financial fair play there. Are there going to be limits imposed on the amount that you can spend?
Yeah, there are. And I think that there are two rules you have to be careful of here. So we have Premier League rules, which we'll push to. We'll be brave and bold, but we won't be reckless. But you've also got to have in the back of your mind that if you did get relegated, that you don't then get caught by rules in the EFL. So it's a double-edged sword. So you've got to plan that through quite carefully. But again, I've just said this club will be brave and bold.
Can a club that was only in League One a season ago realistically compete, though, with the likes of Liverpool, Everton, Arsenal, Man City?
I heard that a year ago when we went from League One to the Championship, 5 clubs on parachute payments, 3 on big parachute payments, and everyone said to us, look, you won't be able to compete with them because over a 40-plus game season, they will wear you down and their squads will simply be too big. And we found a way. And whilst I expect the Premier League to be very challenging and very difficult, it is the best league in the world, the best players, the best coaches, the best managers. We will stick to the way we do things and we'll try and be as effective as we can. And our aim is we want to do what the likes of Brentford and Brighton have done. We want to thrive in that division.
Is that a realistic ambition in your first season back in the top flight, though, or is it just a case of surviving for this first year?
No, I think we're going with the mentality of thriving. I think if you go in with the mentality that, let's just finish 4th from bottom, I wouldn't say it's defeatist, but I think our mentality needs to be slightly different to that. It's a tough division. It is the Premier Division in the world, as I've just said. But internally, we just have to be the very best version of ourselves. That's done us really well over the last 2 seasons, and we look forward to it.
You mentioned some of the work that you're going to have to do on the stadium just now. I mean, obviously, longer term, presumably you'd like to be adding more capacity to the stadium. Yeah,
we're currently just under 30,000. It's a big old stadium in a fantastic town centre location, less than 100 yards from the train station, which is an hour from central London. But we've just secured land with the local authority. So that if and when we want to expand, we could go to 35,000, 40,000. But again, the timing of that is key. You certainly don't want to be a stand down in your first Premier League season because Portman Road is going to be vital to us. But the fan base here is just incredible.
What about the town of Ipswich itself? What is this going to do for the local economy, your promotion?
I think the town and the wider county here, particularly because there are no other football clubs in the region, I think it's incredible. I think it not only reignites and rebuilds a football club, but I do think it rebuilds and assists in the wider economy. It puts Ipswich back on the international map, and we'll be working with the local business community, with the local authority to help and support and enhance this town as best we can whilst we're in the Premier League.
I mean, obviously you have a super fan in the form of Ed Sheeran, who's been your shirt sponsor for the last couple of years. Will that continue?
Yes, it will. An incredible man who supports his local club and cares about his local community. Sponsored us at top value in League One. Sponsors us at top value in the Championship and has now sponsored us at top value in the Premier League. And he's family. He's part of this football club's fabric, and we're so privileged to have him with us. The players got their opportunity to have a little bit of downtime with him last week, but he'll be with us again moving forward.
And I gather you've rewarded the loyalty of the supporters. You haven't put season ticket prices up that much for next year.
No, look, we're fully aware we're still in an economic crisis. Cash is difficult. And part of our plan has been to engage with the local community. We're asking fans to buy shirts, buy hospitality, buy tickets, travel to away games in a difficult financial environment. So we had good debates with our ownership group, and we want to build revenues, but we also want to make football affordable for our fan base, which I think we have done.
You mentioned the importance of Kieran McKenna, the manager, just now. Are you optimistic you can retain his services? I mean, he's going to be in hot demand after his achievements of the last couple of years.
Yeah, look, those are challenges that success will always bring. I'd certainly rather have the challenges of success than the challenges of failure. But Kieran's been great. He signed a new long-term contract last summer, and he's been in the office. He hasn't had a day off. He's been working by my side tirelessly on recruitment and planning and analysis and tactics for next season.
There are statues of Alf Ramsey and Bobby Robson at the ground. How long before you put one up for Kieran McKenna?
Good question. I think if we get a good Premier League season, we better start building now. But no, look, he's been key to us. I've talked about this. Not only is his tactical and technical ability quite incredible, but his values and the way he treats people and the way we work as a team has been key. And I'm sure Kieran will be excited about pitting his wits against the best coaches in the world.
Well, regular viewers might remember that a few years ago we interviewed Clifford Crown. He's the chairman of Brentford Football Club after it was promoted to the Premier League, and they're still there, so maybe that's a good omen for Mark Ashton at Ipswich Town. Still to come here on Business Live, we'll have a look at how the markets are doing this afternoon. Stay with us.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon. The British detectives are planning to meet forensic experts, academics, and even witch doctors.
I remember the grimmest case, the Soham murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
I've never murdered anyone. I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for?
The parole board has to decide if Bronson needs to be kept locked up for the safety of the public. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News, at the Old Bailey.
Well, the big market news this afternoon is that the Dow Jones Industrial Average on Wall Street has gone above 40,000 for the first time. More on that in a moment. In Europe, here's how stocks have finished this afternoon. Only the MIB in Milan in positive territory. One of the main talking points today is Siemens. The German industrial group has fallen 6.25% after its quarterly profits came in below forecast. Here in London, strange sort of day, really. The FTSE 100 hit a new record closing high last night. It's finished more or less unchanged. It would have finished higher, but a number of big FTSE heavyweights have gone ex-dividend today. In other words, they're trading for the first time without the rights to the latest payouts. They include the likes of BP, Unilever, Shell and GSK. Don't worry if you own those shares. That's simply because they've gone ex-div today. Well, elsewhere in the FTSE, Sage, whose chief executive, Steve Hare, was on our programme this morning. It's fallen by just under 9.5%. That is after he appeared to warn on revenue growth. He was very upbeat when we spoke to him, I must say. In terms of the leading blue chip gainer in percentage terms, well, it's BT Group after those results I mentioned earlier. Look at that, it's finished up 17%. On Wall Street, as I say, the Dow has gone above 40,000 for the first time, while the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq are also at all-time highs. Talking points this afternoon include Walmart, which has risen by 6%. That's after it raised its full-year sales and profits outlook, while the insurer Chubb has risen by 3% after Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway declared a $6.7 billion stake. On the foreign exchange markets, well, the US dollar has rallied after yesterday's sell-off. It's up against both sterling and the euro just now. Pound more or less unchanged against a single currency. Meanwhile, the oil price has rallied after weakness this morning, but it remains close to 2 months' lows. A barrel of Brent crude will currently set you back $83.15 a barrel. That's up 0.5% on the session. Well, with me now, Victoria Scholar, Head of Investment at Interactive Investor. Victoria, good to see you this afternoon. I really get annoyed talking about the Dow. It's such a silly index. You know, the S&P 500 is the more meaningful one, but what do you make of it anyway?
Well, it's always the S&P, the Nasdaq and the Dow, isn't it? And we're always monitoring them very closely, whether or not they are actually that important. But I think that 40,000 technical level is significant. You know, it's going to trigger some bull signals, some buy signals from those algos probably. And just from a technical point of view, obviously that is a positive sign for the markets. But, you know, the goalposts have shifted so much since the beginning of the year. You know, we were looking at a slew of rate cuts from the Fed at the start of the year. Now the fact that the Fed could be aiming for one is being taken as positive news after US inflation fell yesterday. So I think there's a bit of optimism about the economic backdrop, and then there's been some good corporate news coming through as well from the US. Walmart, of course, reporting some really strong results, and it's the consumer bellwether stateside. So obviously that, again, a positive signal for the major growth engine of the US economy, the consumer, of course. Absolutely.
Well, closer to home, the big corporate story of the day, I guess, is BT. I mean, what a run. Up 17% in a session. It's very, very rare to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. And also a big change from the gain we saw at the start of the session when it was up about 8%. So it's more than doubled over the course of the day. So something clearly is going on. But, you know, the numbers were good. Free cash flow beating expectations, that being the big one. And it's forecast to try and double that free cash flow over the next 5 years, also aiming to save costs. So I think there's a lot of optimism around the new CEO, Alison Kirkby, and her plans for the company. The dividend also went up. But it comes in the context of a time at which this is a highly shorted stock.
Yes.
So as we were discussing off air, perhaps some investors were coming in and covering those shorts this afternoon. That could explain the big change we've seen from this morning into this afternoon.
Yeah, I agree with that. Now, what about EasyJet? I mean, again, the figures were good. I think the share price is off because Johan Lundgren's leaving.
Yeah, I think so. You know, he's been at the helm for 7 years, a trusty pair of hands. He's steered the low-cost carrier through some serious challenges, the pandemic, of course, being the biggest one there. You know, for EasyJet, there's a lot of good news. Travel is booming. Clearly, despite cost of living pressures, people are still prioritising their summer breaks where they can. We saw that the loss over the 6 months actually narrowed quite significantly from the previous years. But there are tougher news. There is some tougher kind of headwinds as well. It's dealing with airport constraints. There's uncertainty in the Middle East, and that can affect some of its routes. Also, that clouds its outlook for jet fuel, which, of course, is a key cost for the airline too. So there's some pros and cons going on within the company, but it's translating that into positive shareholder returns that's going to be the real challenge for the incoming CEO.
Yes. Well, outside the FTSE, I mean, there's a real bumper crop of results today. I mean, Future are up very strongly. Italy auction partnership and, of course, Watches of Switzerland.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Watches of Switzerland was soaring today, and this is on the back of it saying it's cautiously optimistic about fiscal 2025. So a pretty big reaction to some quite mildly positive news. But I think it's when you put it in the context of what we're seeing in luxury more broadly. Burberry, for example, yesterday down 6% on plunging profits. And we've seen weakness in China, of course, and a slowdown in the US. So the fact that it is managing to spark some optimism for next year is something that investors are clearly clinging to. You know, now is a tough time, but next year is going to be better. Perfect time to buy the stock, arguably.
And, of course, they did that big Italian jewellery acquisition last week, so they're obviously still pretty confident.
Yeah, although jewellery hasn't been its strongest point. I think the pre-owned watch segment has been pretty strong. Perhaps people aren't willing to fork out for a brand new, super expensive watch, but they might be willing to pay a little bit less for something that's pre-owned. OK. Victoria, got to leave it there. Good to see you as ever. Thank you. That's it from me. I'm back again with Business Live tomorrow morning at 11:30. Hope very much to see you then. In the meantime, do stay tuned. Coming up next is Mark Austin with the News Hour. Thanks for joining me today. See you tomorrow. Cheerio.